Disruptors and curious minds, the traditional Hollywood studio system is being challenged in real time. What we think of art is being redefined in real time as well. And today's guest is leading the charge in both of those things. What happens when blockchain meets filmmaking? How can NFTs change how stories are funded, how they're distributed, how they're owned? Is AI creative? How is Hollywood using this crazy tool? We'll talk about this whole creative process, the intersection of art, technology, the human condition. Mark, who are we talking to and what is this all about?
Very animated, Jamie. I love it. Today we're joined by David Bianchi, actor, filmmaker, NFT poet. He has over 100 credits in TV and film, including Criminal Minds, Resident Evil, and Pretty Little Lies. His Web3 series Razor is available on Gala now, and I've been watching a few episodes of that. And if you like sci-fi, check it out. And his new film Catalyst is out now for your viewing pleasure. David Bianchi, welcome to Thinking on Paper. Thank you for thinking on paper with us.
Well, thank you for that. And I think that given the conversation, the title of your podcast is kind of oxymoronic, but it's exciting, man. I still think on paper. I'm always like, I've got my notes.
We have lots. It's behind the scenes. Behind the scenes is where the paper exists.
Yeah, that's right. So thank you for that great introduction. I'm really, really excited to dive into this conversation.
Thank you for being here. And maybe for people who are not familiar with your work, could you give us a broad, high-level view of what Razor is and what is an exclusively Web3 miniseries film production?
Sure. I started producing independent film. I think I directed my first short in 2003. Over the course of 21 years, I've just been producing primarily things that I could act in. That's always been my vehicle. And so through that process of sort of DIY, I've got really, really good at producing. And then flash forward to 2021 is when I was really like ingested into the world of NFTs, where I was arguably one of the first people to mint a short film as a one-of-one Ethereum NFT, an ERC-721 at the time. This predated the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And so that went really, really well. And the people that bought the $69 million Beeple ended up acquiring my Genesis piece, which is a piece called I Can't Breathe. Donated all those proceeds to the George Floyd Memorial Foundation. And then that was a quick meteoric rise. Next thing you know, I was curated at Art Basel and all these incredible places for the films that I produced that were told entirely in spoken word poetry that are socially conscious. And what I found unique about that was that the NFT space, for the first time in my career, was heralding my work as a David Bianchi film. And I really started to study the power of what blockchain could do for film at large and intellectual property. And I was immersed. And I haven't turned back since. To get to your question about what Razor is. So Razor is a product of 21 years of producing, and it's the first Hollywood-produced streaming series to ever be produced entirely by Web3 companies. So from a funding perspective and from a production perspective, and actually produced with the intention that it would be released on a layer 1 blockchain. So the series in and of itself is currently streaming on Gala's proprietary layer 1. And then within that, there's a deeper ecosystem. And behind all that is the first, I think, the most robust watch and earn ecosystem in all of Web3. And we can get deeper into that. But what's really fucking exciting is that not only is it the first of its kind, through my team, I was able to create a really exceptional show. And I say that because I ended up, through my experience and my relationships in Hollywood, I was able to take it to the highest levels of television and got it to earn a Primetime Emmy Award nomination. That is the...
Congrats, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That is the pinnacle of awards in television. It doesn't get any bigger than that. And so this is the first ever Emmy Award that any blockchain ecosystem has ever earned. And so there's a lot around that, but that's what I'm excited about, because I remember...
You see yourself as a trailblazer. I know that people throw these words around willy-nilly sometimes, but what you're describing is an opportunity, not just for filmmakers, but for writers, content producers, musicians. Jeremy might add his awesome analogy about highways going to Hollywood, but it's kind of setting the precedent for a new way for artists to create.
Yeah, I've been called that a lot. I don't like to say it myself. I think it's a bit self-indulgent. It's like someone can say you're humble, but as soon as you say it yourself, you're no longer. But I do concede that I am on the cutting edge of sort of immersive technology, transmedia producing, and carving new experimental pathways for film. That I do feel pretty good about saying, and it's the truth. I'm always looking for new ways. And let's just be honest, like, I'm not experimental with cinema because it's what I want to fucking do. I'm experimental with cinema because I didn't have a fucking choice, right? If Hollywood in 2020 was funding my projects, I would have never turned left and found NFTs. And the only reason I did that was because I've been collecting Bitcoin since 2017. So I was already aware of the underlying tech. So NFTs was a side effect of Hollywood closing the doors on me. Just like crowdfunding became the side effect of independent filmmakers not being able to get their money. Even if you look at the Duplass brothers right now, these guys are legends. Like, these guys are publicly doing a crowdfund, for independent television because the studios are telling them that their work is not valuable. And these are the guys that produce fucking Wild Wild Country, for Christ's sake.
There's histories of cycles with open systems and closed systems. And there's a great book by Tim Wu called The Master Switch that talks about how film was closed and then was open and then was closed again. And we're in another cycle of it opening up. And let's really talk about what blockchain does, what this technology, what this methodology of production really changes for creators like you. So what were you frustrated with about traditional production, about traditional film financing that led you to go, man, we got to break outside the system. We got to do something different because I'm going to...
Who closed that door and why?
Yeah. So on the production side, whether it's blockchain or not, the mechanics of filmmaking don't change yet. There's only been one major sort of tectonic shift in the filmmaking process going all the way back to Thomas Edison's technology. And that is the advent of digital cameras, which remove celluloid. So that's the only major disruption in filmmaking in over 100 years, except now we're kind of on the precipice of text-to-prompt and generative AI. That's another major disruption that we'll talk about. But production-wise, as far as filmmaking is concerned, I explain blockchain to people in the Web2 space. I say, look, it's just another means of distribution, period. Because if I have a film that I mint as an NFT and it's on OpenSea, right? Now, let's say, for example, you guys own that one of one. That's fine. Whoever owns it is whoever owns it. But if it's on OpenSea and the world at large can press play and watch it, that's a distribution platform. It's just another mechanism for delivery. Now, what comes with that is the smart contract and digital ownership and its own native cryptocurrencies and so the financial mechanisms, which are very unique and very different. Just like streaming is a different distribution mechanism. What has it opened? Well, I think that it's opened a new community aspect to the distribution process and also to the funding process. But more importantly, what is the promise of Web3, which is digital ownership? Web 1 was the information highway. Web 2 was password keeping the information highway. And then Web 3 is digital ownership and then the currency associated with that. That's the stuff that makes it very interesting, that for the first time, and we talk about Razor, the first time in Hollywood history, fans can own moments of a Hollywood produced scene as their own digital collectible. That's really fucking interesting to me. And the immersive aspects that it creates for fan bases and for communities to go deeper into the lore of a chosen intellectual property.
The idea of owning a scene in a movie, I always think like how much of the population are down with wanting to own like a little piece of a digital scene versus how many people just want to sit on their couch and be entertained.
And that scene in Reservoir Dogs when they're all walking down the street and the music's playing, I want that scene on my wall on a digital photo. Can I?
Well, okay, so that's a twofold question. So the Reservoir Dogs question, Quentin Tarantino got sued by Miramax when he tried to NFT, unproduced pages from Pulp Fiction. Because at the end of the day, it was proven, and they ended up settling outside of court, that Quentin Tarantino doesn't own Pulp Fiction. Miramax owns Pulp Fiction. And so the studios have what I call intellectual property entanglements. So me as an independent creator, I own the IP, the merchandising and derivatives around Razor. So as a result of that, I can then create permissions where people can own these NFTs because the chain of command lands with me. Right. So that's number one. Number two, who? Well, the same people that want to collect these digital scenes are the same people that want to collect Pokemon Go, are the same people that want Don Mattingly's rookie card, are the same people that want Michael Jordan's rookie card. In every segment of entertainment, there's also a sub-segment of collectability vultures, if you will. Some people want to buy that gold record that they can hang on the wall, even though they're not music producers. Some people want to buy the lightsaber and the poster. But what's important is, why do I want to buy the poster of the lightsaber? I want to buy the poster of the lightsaber because the underlying IP Star Wars is fucking incredible and I want to own a piece of that memorabilia. Now, we as collectors, we want to collect a lot, but we don't want to fucking become hoarders. That's what's great about digital collectibles, is that like I can own a lot, but it doesn't stack up in my closet. So the moral of the story here is that the underlying IP has to be incredibly strong, because otherwise a collectible is worth fuck all. Because especially in digital collectibles, there's this thing called intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is essentially what the marketplace is willing to pay for it. And the marketplace is willing to pay for whatever the IP's velocity is dictating. So what I'm doing with Razor is that Razor's a great IP and people are buying these NFTs because they see value in these, not just from an earnability perspective with the watch and earn, but also from a collectability perspective because they love the IP. If we take what I've done with Razor, and let's say, for example, we flip it on its head and it's a tentpole project, like, I don't know, let's just call it a complete unknown because that's on the tip of my tongue. Let's call it that. Or let's call it, Get Out or one of these major studio tentpoles. Now you've got a global hunger that can create value around a digital collectible. Right? But studios have trouble with that because of the intellectual property entanglements and everything that comes with that. Now, the other final piece of that is the scarlet letter associated with cryptocurrency and Web3. Now, with this incoming administration, I should say the administration, not the incoming, but the administration, the Trump administration, and the laxing of the SEC and so on and so forth, I think you're going to see a lot more comfortability from the studio system entering Web3 because it was still a major scarlet letter during the Biden administration. And so I think these lax policies are going to open the doors even more.
So you make a good point on the value piece of this puzzle, and I tend to think about it two different ways. So if we strip out Stevie Wonder's stem of the keyboard line of Superstition, that has, like, people have listened to that millions of times. They've gone through life moments with that in the background, and it's like part of them. And if I go over here and bang out like a new synth line here and I put it out, it's going to have far different value between, what Stevie Wonder, that these collectibles can actually give you access to experiences and participation like never before. So my example, and I'll let you riff here, but my example would be, with my little thing over here, maybe they can get to add a note to it. Maybe they can get to add a note or tell me how to structure it or something, or some kind of participation. So how is that balanced in the value equation? Is participation part of the equation for Razor, for what Gala's doing, that sort of thing?
Participation is absolutely paramount to what I described as intrinsic value. Look at influencer culture, right? Influencers are worth more when there's more people around. They're worth less when there's less people around. So the more people around a specific NFT collection, or to your point, a musical stem, the more provenance associated with that, then the more value it's going to have. To your example, we've been trying to do stuff like that since 2021. I did a generative fractal spoken word poetry NFT collection, which was wildly heavy. Async was a platform that has now gone defunct, but Async was doing that, where they were splitting up stems and allowing people to manipulate stems. And at the time it was really interesting, but at the end of the day, it was too highbrow and too techy that the small segment of the tech-minded people in Web3 wasn't enough to sustain the tech stack that they built. So how do we create these unique, interesting opportunities within Web3, but still have them be relatively accessible to the masses in the community at large? That's the really tricky thing. Now, to your question about accessibility, that ultimately is in the eye of the beholder. So me as the project creator, I get to dictate whether NFTs will give you access to my project. That's not a guarantee or a must. That's just a fringe benefit. The question is, how do we make these accessibility points and things like that important to people? A great example is with Razor. So decentralization is the philosophy of blockchain. So I wanted to decentralize the casting process. I said to myself, well, look, I wrote one page of dialogue, what we call sides in the casting, and it was unisex. And I said, okay, guys, here's one page. I'm putting this out to anybody on Twitter space. You guys get to upload your own audition, put it up on Twitter, hashtag RZR casting, and then we're going to take the top 20 of those out of the however many come in. I'm going to choose the top 20. Out of those 20, I'm going to give them to the NFT community, and then you all are going to vote on who's going to have a speaking role and earn their Screen Actors Guild card by playing in Razor. I don't care if you have an agent or manager, as long as you live in the domestic 50 and you could get yourself to set. You fit those parameters, great. So now the thing that I found interesting was people actually stepped up and did it. But what I did find interesting was that the volume of submissions was far lesser than what I thought it would be. So that's an example of the access points are really incredible cherries on top of a cupcake. But if nobody knows the cupcake exists, it doesn't fucking matter. That's the tricky thing, is we have to really communicate to people that these things are happening, but people have to understand the value and what is the why proposition.
Choice is inherent in blockchain. There's not one size fits all. It depends on what you're building. Some projects are much more community based, where that active participation is warranted. Some projects there, like my mad vision, I'm going to create this film and I'm going to create this album, and you can be along for the ride. And at the end, you can have some stills or maybe some of this. And it's almost like this: create your own IP, and it gives creators that freedom, that choice to give as much or as little as they want, and which didn't exist before, which doesn't exist in the traditional gatekept Hollywood paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, if you look, if Bobby in Idaho does it or Kai Cenat does it, you're gonna see very different fucking results.
Exactly.
But you look at guys like Kai Cenat, and he's like, I don't need to get experimental. Mr. Beast doesn't need to get experimental with Web3.
Although he is.
Although, well, yes, he makes degen bags, but he's not dropping a meme coin. He's not dropping an NFT project, giving people accessibility because they bought a digital currency. Like, he doesn't need to do all that. No. Right? That's super experimental. What he's making in his own private bags is his own private bags. But I use that as an example, is that like the only people that need to get experimental are people that, for whatever reason, aren't getting the golden goose in the big wide world. I don't see Scorsese minting a collection anytime soon.
That's because of his.
He's got some Bitcoin though.
Smart man.
That's because of his position within the existing production framework, right? In the process, the old system, he is navigate that. He's moving freely through that. There's no friction, but there's friction for many others. And let me ask you this: would Razor have happened without this methodology, this use of?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No way, no how. No way, no how. The only reason why Razor exists was predicated off the clout that I had built as an NFT artist, becoming one of the few, I guess, spark thought leaders in film 3, as we call it. That luck, which is preparation, that opportunity wouldn't have nourished. So because of what I was already doing, it made sense. And they were already in the process of building this ecosystem that I knew nothing about. So when I sat down and I pitched Gala, and I talked to them about what I wanted to do, in fact, speaking of Catalyst at the time, Catalyst was already complete. I had actually pitched them Catalyst to fractionalize it and mint that. And I was like, look, let's just make it easy. I got a done movie. Let's go. But they were like, no, we want to do something from scratch, because they wanted to have that community engagement from the bulb of the growth. And I was like, okay, well, that's really interesting. So I said to him, look, I got this idea. It's like Black Mirror meets Mr. Robot. It appeals to the Web3 community. It's blockchain. It's cyberpunk. It's really tech infused. It appeals to the 18 to 45-year-old white male demographic, which is basically blockchain.
Perfect.
And I was like, and I think we do it short form because that'll appeal to short attention spans and blockchain. And they said, David, we love this idea. Can you send me a deck? And I said, great. Yeah, I'll send you a deck. No problem. I had no fucking deck. Like, I had nothing. Like, I had the idea. I didn't know the title. I didn't know Grimm's name. I didn't know the main character. So I just went to work and I came up with this idea and I started brain dumping, and I was inspired by Neuralink technology, but what Elon Musk was doing at the time. is still very inspired by that. So that was basically the architecture of it. I sent over a deck. And then I think within a week they said, hey, we want to do this. And then we just boom, went to work. We produced 3 NFT collections, and and even before we went into production, I was even writing the script. I had already built 3 NFT collections and so on and so forth that we released to the community. So if it weren't for Web3, with Gala wanting to build this new dream ecosystem, if it weren't for the work that I was doing, Razor absolutely would not exist, because there's no world in traditional Hollywood where they want to make basically a Mr. Robot meets cyberpunk short form series about neural implants, black market crime, and cryptocurrency. Like, that just doesn't exist. And I can further authenticate that as I've talked about traditional distribution channels around Razor, and unanimously, I'm talking about the biggest distributors in television. I'm not going to name drop them, but the biggest sales teams in television unanimously said, David, we love this show, but we just don't have a sales position for it. Like, there's nobody in foreign sales that wants 8 14-minute episodes. In drama or sci-fi, drama is typically 45 to 60 minutes per episode based on streaming trends, and comedy is typically 23 to 30 minutes based on streaming trends, right? So unless you're creating 4x45, or 6x45 or 8x45, you don't have a sellable drama series, period.
I think what's interesting about that is the factory mindset that is producing those old blocks and widgets, the 45-minute blocks and widgets. There's a disconnect between how the younger generation is ingesting this content. They want there are 3-minute episodes that get tremendous viewership. So I think it's really interesting speaking to that and how the disconnect is starting to short circuit a little bit. So we've talked about the production side, we've talked about the creator side. Let's focus on the audience side, right? This whole idea of owning and earning. So if I buy a scene and Mark watches it, I can get a little bit of film token on there. And then we also have this idea of theater nodes where you could be kind of curators and hosts. What else are we missing on the audience side that this new tech is enabling that people could get excited about?
Velocity.
What do you mean?
It's plain and simple. You can have the shiniest Maserati, but if it's sitting in the garage and no one knows you have it, what's the point? And that harkens back to what we were talking about 10 minutes ago, which is having an incredible tech stack is only as good as cultural adoption. And one of the things that Gala has done exceptionally well is create these really elegant UI UXs and this really elegant back of the house engineering with the watch and earn ecosystem and the tokenomics and all these sorts of things. And they have entrusted me. I mean, Razer launched their platform and, the pitches ecosystem, for example, that's a very, very powerful way to essentially, be able to crowdfund your own projects within the Gala film ecosystem with its own native currency. It's a very exciting proposition. But one of the things that I got to admit is one of the weakest links there is their ability to get it out to a massively wide audience. So this is public information. If you go on the Gala Film site and you go on the charts tab, you'll be able to see the viewership of each of the IPs that they host on Gala Film. You'll see that Razer is the clear leader. If you look at the all-time, Razer's a clear leader with about 600,000 views and about 250,000 unique viewers. And as far as distribution is concerned, those numbers are negligible. I mean, nowadays, if you don't have 1 million views on YouTube, who the fuck are you? And so
Put on paper.
Right. And then if you look at the number two title on their platform, which is Ghosts of Ruin, they've only had 1,000 total views. I think maybe 60,000 total views. So as far as distribution is concerned, those numbers, again, they're inconsequential. And that is one of the biggest challenges that I think Gala has faced, which is, going into what they've created, which is absolutely luxurious and fantastic and all these things, is that I think going into this, we realize that we want to produce content and also have a platform. But what that means is that you're a studio and a distributor. And they both require their own sets of money, their own sets of teams, their own sets of modalities. And you can't have one without the other if it's going to be a successful platform. So I think that the number one thing that Gala is working on right now is really their marketing push, is getting the brand out there as much as possible to get more eyeballs in, because there are millions of people on this planet that would love Razer, but they just haven't seen it because they don't know it exists. So my job as a producer, not as an actor, is how do I proliferate the brand to the best of my ability? So by the grace of God, and I say that by the grace of God because I struck lightning in a bottle when it comes to Razer, because I own the IP, right? So that was Gala following the philosophies of Web3. They said, David, you're the artist. You go ahead and do this. We're going to help fund the project. We're going to distribute the project, but we're not going to get in the way of your creativity. That never fucking happens in Hollywood. Literally, gentlemen, I'll tell you, I went to production, wrote the script with my writing partner, produced 3 NFT drops. We went all the way through principal photography. I didn't even show the executives at Gala a daily. They didn't see dailies. And I picture locked it. I have created
dailies, just to break it down, dailies are snippets and snapshots of what happened during a day of shooting. So it's almost like a proof of the process going on. And then be able to QC and say, yo, I don't like what I saw.
Correct. Typically in the studio system, dailies are basically the footage they're basically the footage that was shot each day. And typically in the studio system, those rushes, they're called rushes, are sent to the executives, and they get to kind of thumb through them, and they either give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Now, what that does is that it slows down the creativity. It turns the speedboat into a tugboat because you've got to go through layers of chain of command and approvals. Now, because Gala trusted me, they just let me do it. Razer is what it is and got to be a primetime Emmy-nominated series because I didn't have to ask Big Brother every single time I wanted to make a decision. Even if you look at the archetypes in Hollywood, even Tom Cruise doesn't have that kind of creative provenance. Even Martin Scorsese oftentimes has to answer to the studio for final cut.
Back by velocity, right? Back to velocity.
And you said that with Tarantino. Can I think that's a perfect point because this show is a two-pronged, let's open Pandora's box. So we've spoken about the distribution, we've spoken about blockchain and Web3. Let's talk about the creativity. Let's talk about the creative side of this. I just want to segue these two pieces of the show together with a quote from your character in Razor, Grimm, who I think maybe this might reflect some of your own perspective on blockchain's potential. Financial systems, social structures hunger. We can bring tyrants to their knees. With this kind of technology, we can rebuild systems that have failed mankind for millennia. And I think that maybe that reflects some of the potential of blockchain. Okay, so we have the distribution. Let's move to AI. And on Thinking on Paper, recently we've been reading this book, Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari, and it speaks a lot about creativity. So I've got two questions for you, David. One is, how do you think and define creativity? What does creativity mean for you? And the second part of that question is, has that changed in the past couple of years as AI has entered your life? Has the very human notion of creativity for you changed at all?
Yeah, powerful question. I mean, look, creativity is a side effect of an individual's perspective on the world. So how I see and move and view the world, my creativity that is birthed is a side effect of my perception. And that is conditioned by a multitude of things going all the way back to my formative years. Proliferation of that creativity is driven by inspiration, because money follows inspiration. Movies and TV shows are made with inspiration, not with money, because money follows inspiration. How are things built? Like, producing is fucking sales, guys. It ain't creativity. I got to go in and I got to sell somebody on my idea. And if you don't believe me, who the fuck will, right? I have to get this thing across the finish line so I can get the money, so I can get to the creativity. And even when I'm building the creativity, it's still project management. It's still business, right? And so that stuff is followed by my perception of the world, which instigates the creativity, and then the creativity instigates the inspiration, and the inspiration instigates the product. Now, how do we get to the product is where artificial intelligence lands, because that is basically the break in the stream, the break in the riverbed that converges the water into a different direction to ultimately get to the sea. Artificial intelligence right now, I think for creatives, and I'll speak from a filmmaking process, is basically creating an accessibility that otherwise didn't exist. It's what digital cameras did in the early 2000s or so. You know, it gave people the ability to have a relatively decent looking image and shoot films without having to do with processing in labs and digital interface scanning and all the things and all the clunky things that come with celluloid. It created an accessibility. And that, to me, I think is the biggest thing that artificial intelligence is doing. It's giving people accessibility. If you think about Razor, for example, bringing down social structures and bringing tyrants to their knees, right? Our ability to text to prompt and scour the entire internet in a matter of seconds. That's power, right? And so it's putting power in the hands of the creatives. That I find very, very interesting. And the jury's out on how that's going to affect things. So within my creativity, do I use artificial intelligence? Absolutely. You know, when I produced Razor, and this was early January 2023, Midjourney was still in beta mode. You know, my production designer had no idea what Midjourney was. So I was creating all the production design and all the neural diagrams and all this stuff that we needed in the background that I knew was going to be out of focus, but I needed texture. I was building all that stuff for her. I created a whole Google Drive and I just dumped it on her. I was like, here, print this out, use this. And so I had, if you look at Razor's full of screens, there's fucking screens everywhere. Now, if I had green screen that stuff, I would have had a visual effects budget that would have far superseded my production budget. But going into this as an independent filmmaker, right? You know, creativity, desperation is the mother of creativity. So how do I get creative as a producing partner? As a producer, I got to figure out how to make this work with the money that I have. So because I was desperate and I didn't have the money, I had to figure out how to fucking make it work. So having all these screens in pre-production, I said, well, I'm going to build all these assets so that when we shoot these screens, I don't have to do compositing and any burn-ins. We're shooting stuff natively in camera. So about 85% of the screens that you see in Razor already had assets that were on them on the day during production. They weren't burned in. So as a result of that, I was able to save a fuck ton of money in visual effects. But that's where AI came in, because I knew this stuff was going to be soft and out of focus. So I just go, okay, Midjourney, make me a diagram that's cyberpunk that looks like a neural scan. That's something that like blah, 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 blah. And I create all these assets and I was able to use that. We created artificial intelligence news anchors, but that fit into the world and the lore of Razor. Yeah. Did it take money away from actors? Absolutely. Okay, but it fits into the world of what I was building. So I think artificial intelligence is going to continue to not only disrupt filmmaking, but it's going to create more accessibility, which means that the dinosaurs of Hollywood, and I consider myself a dinosaur of Hollywood, if you will, we have to keep up with the 19-year-olds in Bangladesh. I got to keep up with the 20-year-olds in Jacksonville, Florida that are ready to take my job. And they've proven to the commercial houses and the ad houses and now the studio system that they can create stuff for a fraction of the dollar. Like if you, what was it? What's the movie? The movie that just won the Academy Award that was made entirely on Blender. It's an animated series, an animated feature, just won the Academy Award. It beat out a $200 million Pixar film. And it was made on an open source piece of tech, right? So the apex is here. And that's the biggest thing is disruption and accessibility. And that creativity is what's driving that divergence in the water. That's what's getting people to the sea.
Yeah, wonderful example there. The technology has made a lot of things accessible for a long time, proven history. We can just look back. I mean, just look at like a full recording studio and analog tape is now on my iPhone, you know, and that sort of thing, right? So you're seeing a lot of this. It's a trend. It's parallels. It's all of that stuff. We unpacked an essay by Packy McCormack. I don't know if you've read much of his stuff. He's been on the head of emerging tech and how it affects culture, but he has this
Not boring newsletter.
Not boring newsletter. And he had one called Most Human Wins that talked about, it was almost a guideline. It was a dispatch and a guideline for humans that want to exist in the world of technology. We have a whole episode that we dedicate to it. And I want to get your thought on his general thesis. And I think it's in line with what you said. But for humans, according to Packy, and I tend to agree with him, according to what he wrote, humans, the success of human participation in economies and creativity and all of these things will be judged on their ability to move up a higher level of abstraction, meaning things that used to be something that you did, now you have to take a step up and grab the Lego block that's already created by a tool. And you use that as your ingredient to make something new, and you keep moving up. So what is your thought on that?
Can I just explain that for our listeners who haven't listened to that episode? Essentially, I think what the granular level is, human plus AI is more than human or AI on their own. If you're thinking creatively and you're willing to put some of your old thought process in the background and move forward with AI, you can create more than you could on your own. And the people who do that, who move up those layers of creativity using the tools, will ultimately succeed where others don't.
1,000%. I mean, that goes without saying. Like if you look at nanosurgery, if you look at even how Tesla vehicles are produced, right? A man is far more capable at progress with the utility of machine. And now the mind of the machine is artificial intelligence and the ability to have their own sort of cognition, if you will, right? AI will never be sentient, right? They can't feel shit, but cognition, absolutely. The fear is singularity, right? You know, I mean, we're on the edge of some sort of AGI that people are afraid of, right? Specifically in the military sector. That's terrifying if we can get, the sector, artificial intelligence to the point of singularity. Now we're in serious deployment issues, right? Now, to your point is that, yes, Razor is a microcosm of that. I was inspired by what Elon said a long time ago. He said, look, I'm exponentially smarter with my mobile device in my hand. The problem is that the latency from device to my frontal lobe is too slow. How do we turn that trickle into a broken dam? And the way that you do that is you put the artificial intelligence on the gray matter of the brain, so that the electrical circuitry is happening right there, right? And so to this gentleman's argument is that, yes, we as human beings will progress much, much faster, much, much further with the utility and the understanding that artificial intelligence is working for us. AI agents are here. They're not going anywhere. More and more AI is slowly matriculated into our culture. When I think about it, like people in Minnesota right now are going on Google and they're doing Google searches, and it's basically LLM that's giving you the answer. Now it's starting to become normalized, right? That to me is very exciting. The prospect of singularity is terrifying, but for where we are right now, I think it's an incredible thing. And I think that we will continue to excel if we lean into this stuff.
Can I ask one question? I just want to follow on with that, just continue that thread, that chain of consciousness. You mentioned the military, again, Nexus, we've spoken about dictatorship, totalitarianism, and democracy, and how whether our nightmares come true or whether that's just media hype, it only takes one bad, nefarious actor
Yes.
to ruin everything for everybody. So we don't even need to talk about military AGI if somebody somewhere in a remote country wields that power. How do you, maybe if we burrow down on Razor and Hollywood and AI in your creative industry, how does humanity make it safe and fair that everybody has the same access to it? And it's like, I don't know much about Hollywood, but I know that there were the writers' strikes last year. There was a lot of pushback against AI. Like, how do you and how should Hollywood think about making it universally accessible and fair?
I have to say that I don't see the word fair being injected into progress in artificial intelligence.
Okay.
We work and live in a capitalistic society, right? Filmmaking is an autocracy for a reason, right? You can't have 5 directors and get through anything that's decent, right? Too many chefs in the kitchen, as we say. So the studio system is always going to be looking to help their P&L, and nowadays, have to answer to, their boards of directors and so on and so forth. So what does that mean? The dollar is always going to win. And if artificial intelligence is going to help cut costs, and that's what it's going to be. And as that trickles down, it will not be fair to the lower man at the bottom of the pyramid. It will only be fair to the top 5%. And I think that the Screen Actors Guild specifically is making leaps in terms of trying to protect the intellectual property of our physicality, right? Because synthetic versions of ourselves are already here. Like, look, Kim Kardashian, Paris Hilton, like these major influencers, they're already licensing out their synthetic selves. I mean, CAA and some of these bigger agencies, they already have photogrammetry booths so that they can, scan and have synthetic doubles of all their players. Because if I could be in LA shooting something, but also in Budapest at the same time, right? So you get my synthetic double for 80% of the dollar, and then you get my physical self for 100% of the dollar. Well, then that's a win-win for the agency and for the talent. The only thing that the Screen Actors Guild is trying to do is trying to put guardrails around the idea of synthetic doubles, because that's here and it's here to stay. I just don't think that there's going to be a fairness, guys, because let's be honest. Look at blockchain. Right? Financial systems, these social structures, right, that are held by tyrants are primarily accessible to the top 3%. As it relates to financial and technological movements, the layman is usually last to the game. The retail sector is last to the game, And so I just don't see that there is going to be much fairness. And I know that sounds very doom and gloom, but unfortunately.
But it's honest, so we like it. Thank you.
I wrote an article about 3 or 4 years ago that got me thinking about all of this stuff with these new systems. And I used to call them like these calcified old structures that no longer serve their participants. You said something very akin to that, David, earlier with new systems coming up, but we have to be careful, don't we, to just not move the gatekeeper to these new systems, right? So like we could build all these great new decentralized systems, but in the work of Tim Wu, Master Switch, that decentralized system can quickly turn closed and controlled again. What do we need to think about? And I know you're not we're just riffing here. So, but like, what can we do? Once these decentralized systems gain so much popularity that someone wants to control them, like, what do we do with that?
Well, Blackwater, right? There's going to be a day where people will look back and be like, holy shit, you got in before Blackwater. I mean, look, I'm not skull and bones, right? I'm not part of the global administrations or the global geopolitical power. But as far as I'm concerned, what tipped Donald Trump? Larry Fink tipped Donald Trump, right? When the likes of Larry Fink come in and say, this is the thing for the next generation of financial structures, guys like Donald Trump pay attention, right? When BlackRock says yes, the world moves. And so that's what you're just describing. At the end of the day, look, Bob Marley said something very fascinating and very simple. He says, have no fear for atomic energy because none of them can stop the times. That's basically the theme of this whole thing. So what can we do that is within our control to get a small piece of this pie? That's all we can do. And as far as the wider world is concerned, if I live too much in the macro, I lose sight of my micro. And if I live too much in my micro, I'm not paying attention to wider trends. So it's about finding the balance of what works for you as a creative. I use artificial intelligence to my advantage so I can keep my lights on and keep producing at the highest level I possibly can. I'm never going to be the guy that's going to be able to swoop in and Michael Saylor 1,000 Bitcoin in a day, but I can buy $100 a week on auto buy and not even think about it, right? So whatever that means to you, to live within this technological new wave, using it to your advantage and feeling comfortable in your own skin with where you are in your creativity, that's success, right? Success is peace. How do you find peace in this complicated world of technology and everlasting and ever unfolding change? You know,
Well said. Well said. We had our last guest. Last guest was in the blockchain world, and we like to link these episodes together just like you would link your episodes of Razor together. So we had the head of product for World ID that is looking to establish a new means of digital identity for people operating in any type of system, any type of community. Ajay left a question for you. So David, the question from our last guest is, how do you balance educating audiences about new technologies with the often dystopian narratives that come out, right? So whenever we touch about
scaring people about it.
Scary. The answer to that question is you don't fucking bother, dude. If I'm trying to seriously, dog, if I'm trying to sell you an electric car, I'm not going to tell you about how lithium is raping the earth. Fuck all that. I just want to sell you a fucking car. I'm going to tell you how it works. I'm going to tell you why you need it. And I'm going to tell you how it's going to make your life better, period. So when it comes to Razor, for example, and all the tech stuff that I use it behind the house, if I start getting into a conversation with a Web2 person about utility and blockchain and accessibility and decentralization, they're going to tell me to fuck myself. My goal is how do I sell you a sexy product that's going to make your life better? And if you choose to tap into the back of the house, that's on your own volition, off the back of the successful experience that you had with my show, right? If you buy a mystery box and you're a Web2 user, it's because you love the show and you found interest in this platform that it's streaming on, right? So I don't get into dystopian narratives because dystopian narratives are for the dorks of the community. We're the only ones talking about dystopia, right? The Web2 people at large are not thinking about dystopic tendencies in artificial intelligence because they're not learned enough to understand why that stuff even matters. Most people don't know what singularity stands for. They don't know what AGI is. And so if you don't know what AGI is, you have no reason to think about dystopia. My job is just to create the best possible piece of motion picture that can move an audience and take them on a journey and an experience. That's my job. And whatever they discover beyond that is up to them. One thing I just want the audience to understand is that whether it's blockchain or whether it's artificial intelligence or whatever those modalities are, the only thing that you should focus on is how do you maintain a sense of serenity through all of this chaos. Because if I'm not serene inside, I don't have the ability to have the mental cognition to be creative, and I don't have the physical, emotional prowess to inspire. And if I can't inspire, I can't raise money. And if I can't raise money, I can't do the thing. Whether you're a filmmaker or you're a startup, it's got to come from the inside. And if I allow these outside factors to congest me and pollute me, all I'm doing is truncating my ability to make the world a better place. Period. Because your creativity is yours and the world is waiting for it, right? So if you get too caught up in dystopian themes, all you're going to do is put venom on your ability to make the world a better place.
There you go. Hey, last quick thing. Give us a question for the next guest. Can be about any topic, anything. Doesn't have to be tech, doesn't have to be film, storytelling. Sure. Can be about clipping your toenails if you want.
No, I think that's a great question. Is that whether you are a tech person, whether you're a creative person, what are you doing on a daily basis to stay out of your own?
I love it. Great.
Thanks for joining us.
All right, brothers. Thank you so much, guys.
Take it easy.
Bye.
All right, we're backstage, Mark.
Great.
After, interesting conversation, man.
Can I wanted to follow on the, we're going to get to summarize this for the listeners, but the art as educational tool. And that's not the right words, but science fiction has, by look or by crook, educated millions of people about modern technology and future technology. Most of the futurists in Silicon Valley have actually been brought up on science fiction and created the things that they are now creating because of the books that they read and because of the films that they watched. And I think that art does play a role. Anyway, I digress. Jeremy.
No, so what I got out of this last bit about the dystopian future and that sort of thing, we learn a ton about the future from science fiction novels, like you just said. 100% agree with that, and there's no debating that. What I thought was interesting about what he said was it's not the responsibility of the new users of tech to advocate for the technology, right? In a way, I think that's what I got out of that. And he's like, dude, I'm just trying to make a show. I'm trying to make a film. I use a certain amount of tech to do that. My stories might be tech dystopian a little bit, but it's not his job to advocate. It's not a documentary about the tech as it emerges, right? So I thought that was really interesting. So what for you, what is one thing you want the listeners to take away from this show today about the future of blockchain and filmmaking?
And AI. And I think that, well, David Bianchi and Razor, I think they give us a real glimpse of predominantly the distribution model, but also the storytelling model that could define how people make television and film, and by association other art in the coming years and decades. I know that you often speak about this dual highway that leads to the promised land, and you have traditional tech and you have this new Web3, blockchain, AI, quantum, all these new technologies alongside it. And I think that Razor is an early example of what this technology can do for people.
And I don't know if I'm missing something yet, or maybe I'm just not as excited about it. But like, even if it was like one of my favorite musicians, one of my favorite films, you know, he referenced Bob Marley. Bob Marley is one of my favorites just from a philosopher perspective. And I use that term with sincerity. I don't know that I want to have a 5-minute MP4 scene as a collectible. Like, to me, that doesn't resonate yet. And I might just be missing the boat and not seeing, you know, what a Lego block may be.
Jeremy, you might just be old.
Maybe so. I mean, the beard is gray, my friend. I don't accumulating that in a hard wallet somewhere, cold wallet somewhere that, you know, I can make, hey, Mark, look at this thing. I can press play and you could have seen it on your own computer. Like, I'm not there yet with it, but there's a good chance I'm missing something. But
I don't think that you and me and our generation and the generation before us will ever get there, because we grew up in a world where collectibles were things which you held in your hand. And for the generations growing up now, collectibles are digital. They do exist online. They do exist in their phones, and that's cool for them. And they collect and enjoy that. And I think they would collect MP4s of their favorite scenes.
And then also, we forgot to really, I want to, go back to this a little bit, just really quick, because we said we were going to answer the question, how is viewing a film going to change for you as an audience member? So he referenced this towards the end of the show, where you could collect boxes. You're watching this series and all of a sudden, boop, there's a little box that pops up. Picture it like a little mystery box, right? That you could choose to buy or not buy, and you buy it. It has additional content, additional ways to interact with the content that you're seeing for free. So that, I see the participation thing changing, being more bi-directional, dare we say.
Bi-directional value exchange. Bringing it back.
All right, let's land the plane, Mark. Who we got next week? Who's coming up?
Next week, we've got Jihao Sun, who is the founder of Flock.io. They make LLMs. The week after that, we have a special guest, but we can't release details on that until May. And the week after that, we have Kevin Kelly on the show. And that's pretty big news.
Stay tuned for book club 2. We're reading Irreducible by the guy that basically created the first microprocessor. So he knows a little bit about tech, a little bit about consciousness. We're going to balance in between those two. Thinkingonpaper.xyz. Check them all out. Come see us. We'll be there sooner than later.
Stay disruptive.
Be curious.
Keep thinking on paper. See you next week.